Praise God, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the day that the Lord has made. May we be glad and rejoice in it. Today is a special day. We are recording the video at night in a car, in a place that is very busy. One thing I have learned is that there is no place that is so difficult for us to do the work of God. And so today we are going to do the work of God in transit. And we're going to do the longest Bible study. I don't know how I'm going to pull this off, but brothers and sisters, when I had started reading the Bible, it was easy to read 10 chapters because my understanding was not deep. But the more you go into reading the Word of God and the depth of it and deeper understanding, every verse is important. So you find like you're almost writing down the whole Bible, because there is newer knowledge and newer understanding each time you read the Word of God. I pray that God will help me summarize this, because it's really a lot of work. We are doing our day 3 on a day like this, and I pray that God will be able to give us time to fix this within just 1 hour. So we are starting by reading Genesis chapter 21, and we are going all the way up to chapter 30. And from Genesis chapter 1, we look at the birth of Isaac, and we see that the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. And that Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham named Isaac and circumcised him at 8 days old. God answered Sarah like he had promised, and exactly at the time he had set. What I learned from this is that God will always come through for us at his set time. We cannot twist God. We just have to wait and trust him. At this set time that God gave Abraham and Sarah a son, Isaac, Abraham was 100 years. And so Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. She also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? You see, when God revealed the truth to Sarah about her being a mother, she laughed. And when God questioned why she had laughed, she denied because she was afraid. But then this time when she gave birth, she laughed. And she was like, who would have said? There are things God will do for those who wait patiently and trust his word, that the world will say, who would have thought? The world themselves will give an account. And the reason we should love God's people is that innocently they do not know when they offend us, because man will always be man. They rejoice with you in times of joy, and they make fun of you in times of... You always walk through the difficult times alone, but you'll always walk the joyful moments together with people. That's who they are. People do not want to be around when things are hard, and we need to love them the way they are and trust them. But those who know their God, remember, they shall always be strong and do great exploits. So if you know God and you consider God your worthy God, then you should be able to stand with your people both in good and difficult times. That's what sets us apart. And so we see Hagar and Ishmael depart at a point when Sarah had started seeing that Ishmael was getting into the space of Isaac, and she became a little bit jealous. And she had seen Ishmael was scoffing, and so she asked Abraham to cast out the mother of Ishmael, that is Hagar, and her son. For Ishmael, she said, was not to inherit part of Isaac's inheritance. Of course, for me, I'll tell you, we do not know why, but it was Sarah who enticed Hagar to conceive for the husband. And so Hagar innocently accepted the request of her mistress. But then again, like sin would have it, she would not remain comfortable in her place. She tried to take the place of the woman of the house. And so they fell out. And of course, God had not intended that Hagar would be in the picture. It was the work of man, the helper, convinced Abraham, who had received the message of God. And so she became part of the picture. But I love what God did. God did not want the seed of Abraham, even that which was not the one he had planted, to be left without a blessing. So God blessed Ishmael and God blessed Isaac. And with Ishmael, he gave him generations and wealth. But for Isaac, he made his chosen race. And so, helping us understand that being a chosen race is more important than wealth, earthly wealth. Ishmael was made wealthy, but over and above the wealth and multiplication for Isaac, God chose him as a chosen race. And so the matter of casting Ishmael and Hagar out of the presence of Abraham really was displeasing in Abraham's sight. Why? Because he loved his son Ishmael and never wanted Ishmael to grow away from the dad. But God said to Abraham, do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad, or because of the bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice. For in Isaac your seed shall be called. Yet I will also make a nation of Ishmael, because he is your seed. Yes, God will always stand with what is right, though we also know that he's not going to abandon the chosen. He will not abandon us in our mistakes. Our God is always going to stand with us. We have all erred. We all have skeletons in our closets. We all have garbage littered in our backyard. But when we surrender to God, he will help us. In one way or another, he will surely help us. And so he was willing to help Abraham fix his family situation. God was going to let Ishmael go out of the presence of the dad, but God was not going to leave Ishmael alone. And God blessed Ishmael because he was the seed of Abraham. And Abraham sends Hagar and her son away with bread and a skin of water. Hagar departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And when the water was finished, she placed the boy under one of the shrubs. She went and sat down across from him at a distance of about a bow shot, for she said to herself, let me not see the death of my boy. So she sat opposite him and lifted her voice and wept. So Abraham provided. But what man can provide has a limitation. So what Abraham had provided for Hagar and the son ran out. And so when it ran out, Hagar, who was dependent on Abraham, realized now that was it. She knew what was coming next was going to die. And likewise, in our human wisdom, we have reached a point where we know at this point only death will rescue us. And we've surrendered to death. But listen, at the point when she had surrendered and she had left the son a distance away to die, and she's gone away to not witness that painful experience, and she was weeping, and She was crying to God. She had so many questions. I know all of us have reached that point. All of us who seek God, even those who have not yet understood, we have reached that point where we know that at this point, nothing can be done. And at that point, Ishmael was crying. He needed water to drink, and she didn't have it. God heard the voice of Ishmael. This is a very sad experience. Yes, God heard the voice of the lad crying. And the angel of the Lord called to Haggai out of heaven and said to her, "What ails you, Haggai? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad and hold him with your hand, for I make him a great nation." God always hears the voices of his children when they cry. God answers prayers of those who know how to pray, but God hates it when his chosen children cry. And so he heard the child, and he spoke to Haggai, and he says, "I have heard the little boy. The little boy needs to live. I've chosen him. He is a seed of Abraham. He cannot die. He cannot lack." And he chose to keep him alive. And that confirms to you that children can never be a mistake. If God has chosen you, his children, wherever they are, he will bless them. And so God, after speaking to Haggai, he also opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. Then she filled the skin and gave the lad to drink. So that was the end of the suffering for Haggai. And so God was with Ishmael, and Ishmael grew, and he dwelt in the wilderness, and he became an archer. His mother took a wife for him from Egypt. So out of difficult situations, people grow. As long as you're with God, it does not matter where you are. God will make sure that he keeps you safe, and he'll help you to get out. The result of making choices without consulting God, but because of God's love, he will always watch out. So a covenant with Abimelech, seeing that God was with Abraham, they came to him and made him swear that Abraham would not deal falsely with them, their offsprings, all their posterity, but according to the kindness that I have done to you and will do to you, to me, and to the land in which you have dwelt. We all know what happened in our last reading when Abraham came to the land of Abimelech, and he did not disclose that Sarah was his wife, but he said it was a sister, and Abimelech took her, and so God appeared to Abimelech and said, "Touch her and you will die." And so God prevented a very ugly incident. And so what Abimelech did, he gave a piece of land at a distance where Abraham and his wife and all he had dwelt and lived. And so while there, God prospered Abraham, gave him mighty wealth. And so it was at this time when Abimelech saw that Abraham was very prosperous, that he came to make peace, because they were scared. If he turned against them, or if he joined hands with the enemy, they would conquer them, because he had become mighty and they had seen God was with him. And yes, God, when he is with you, people will know the power that you possess through God, and people will make an effort at all cost to want to partake and share in your ways, because they know that you have God on your side. And so they came and made a covenant with Abraham. And so at this, Abraham rebuked Abimelech over a well, but Abraham pleaded innocent. Abimelech pleaded innocent, and the two made a covenant by Abraham taking up sheep and oxen and giving them to Abimelech. Chapter 22 talks about Abraham's faith being confirmed. And so God tested Abraham by asking him to take his only son Isaac, whom Abraham loved so much, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which God would tell him. When I was sharing last time, I really went deep in this. And if you would come across my video when I was doing the reading for this chapter, because that time I used to do like 3 or 5 chapters, it was not hectic. God tested the love of Abraham, and this is the highest sacrifice he would ever demand: human sacrifice. We need to know that the devil has understood this, and he's using it to cage us. People are getting rid of their loved ones to make covenant with the devil for long life and wealth and stuff. However, God had wanted to test the sacrifice of, to test the love of Abraham. And so what he would not allow Abraham do, we shall see in the New Testament that he actually did. Abraham had only one son, God had only one son. Abraham is called to sacrifice his son, but because the heart of Abraham and the heart of God were so close like this, and so Abraham would not reject anything God requested, so he accepted to offer his only son. And so Abraham, having obeyed, he took 2 of his young men, and they went to the place God had told him to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. And so when they were almost close, he told them to stop at a distance. He told Isaac to carry the wood while he carried the knife and fire. And so Isaac asked his father, look, we have the fire, we have the wood, but where is the sacrifice? Where is the burnt offering? And Abraham said, my son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering. Abraham did not know what God was going to do, but he knew God was going to do the perfect thing. And if God desired to take Isaac, he knew that that is what he thought was right. And so what God requires from us is to trust him, that he who started a good work will finish it. Abraham trusted God. Mary trusted Jesus. And all God expects us is to trust him, that he knows what is good for us. He knows the plans for us. Abraham, our grandfather of faith, shows us how we should live by example. Sometimes we hold on to the things of the world and we miss the great privileges. Abraham was not willing to hold on to his son Isaac. He was willing to let him go, because he knew he who gave him Isaac would give him more. He who gave him Isaac when he was already dead as a man and Sarah dead as a woman, he would still give them another son. Is anything too difficult for him? That's what he asked Sarah when Sarah laughed, when he said, I'll give you a child. God now is asking to take the child away. Abraham says, it is well. You gave him, you take him. And that's what God expects from us in every situation. And so Abraham waits upon God, but he continues to fulfill the promise. He acts in obedience. He he builds the altar, and he placed the wood in order, and he bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar. At this point, we do not know really what was going through in the head of Abraham, but I'm sure Isaac was already saying, Daddy, why are you doing this to me? Probably also Isaac cried, and God heard the cry of Isaac like he heard the cry of Ishmael. And so when he had stretched his knife to slay his son, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham, don't lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Abraham lifted his eyes, and behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. God waited at the point when Abraham was going to cut his son into pieces. The call was an urgent call. God called him twice. And he says, don't do anything to my son, to your son. Now I know. Yes, now I know. If God has given us instructions, if he's testing us, he will not allow us to go through with it. He did not allow Abraham to go through with it. Wow. And so Abraham, having seen a ram stuck in the thicket, he took the ram and offered it up for the burnt sacrifice instead of his son Isaac. And Abraham named the place, God will provide. At the right time, God will provide. And so the angel of the Lord called Abraham the second time out of heaven. And then God, swearing by himself, says, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son, blessing I'll bless you, and multiplying I'll multiply you, your descendants, as the stars of heaven and as the sand which is on the seashores. And your descendants shall possess the gate of the enemies. In your seed all nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So now, what I needed to emphasize is that at every level, God made a promise. When Abraham offered the sacrifice of animals cut in 2 pieces, God emphasized and revealed more finer details about his promises. And then the next level is when God gives them another sacrifice of shedding blood through circumcision, and God re-emphasized his promise at that level. Now, with Abraham offering Isaac as the topmost prize sacrifice, God emphasized his plan for God's children the third time. And we know the power that lies in number 3. On the third day, Jesus resurrected. On the third day, Jonah was vomited by the fish. On the third day, Paul saw after he had had an encounter with Jesus Christ. On the third day, Esther redeemed the children of Israel from Haman. The third day is very important. So on the third time, God saw by himself, and he said, Abraham will have descendants as many as the stars, that no one would be able to count them, as much as the sand. And he says, whoever blesses them will be blessed, and whoever curses them will be cursed. And that the descendants of Abraham, would possess the gate of the enemies, and in his seed all nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed the voice of God. And so we see details about Nahor's family, that is Abraham's other brother, who stayed in Haran, in Uri. And out of his descendants, there is Rebecca, who later became the wife of Isaac. Genesis chapter 23 talks about Sarah's death and her burial. We see Sarah lived 427 years. She died before Abraham. And so Abraham bought a piece of land as a burial ground at a full price. People whom he lived among were willing to give him free land, but he insisted he wanted a ground that he could possess as his own. Anything that we have paid for No one can take away from us. But what has been given to us freely, anything can happen. Aware of that, he demanded to get a piece of land, and it is on this piece of land that he was buried. His wife Sarah was buried, and his legal children were buried, and their wives. And so the people he lived among offered free land, but he insisted to pay for it 400 shekels of silver, and so Sarah is buried. Genesis chapter 24 talks about a bride for Isaac. Abraham was now old, well advanced in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. Abraham said to the oldest servant of the house, who ruled over all he had, "Please put your hand under my thigh, and I'll make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but you shall go to my country and to my family and take a wife for Isaac." Then the servant said, "Perhaps the woman will not be willing to follow me to this land. Must I take your son back to the land from which you came?" Abraham said, "Be aware that you do not take Isaac back. The Lord God of heaven, who took me from the land of my family and who spoke and saw to me, saying, 'To your descendants I'll give this land.' He will send his angel before you and shall take a wife for my son from there. And if the woman does not want to follow you, then you will be released from the oath. Only don't take Isaac back there." The servant saw to Abraham concerning the matter. And so the servant made his way to Abraham's native land for the search of a wife for Isaac. And then he prayed to God of Abraham to give him success and show him kindness to Abraham. And soon afterwards he prayed that it should be that the young woman to whom I say, "Please let down your pitcher that I may drink," said, "Drink, and I will also give you camels a drink. Let her be the one you should appoint for your servant Isaac. And by this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master." And it happened before he had finished speaking, Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, the brother of Abraham, came through. The girl was beautiful, and behold, a virgin. She did all the servant had set as a sign for the one, and the man wondering at her, remained silent so as to know whether the Lord had made his journey prosperous. Rebekah agreed to host the servant and his people in their father's house. The servant worshipped God for not forsaking his mercy and his truth towards his master. Rebekah had a brother called Laban, and when offered a meal, he refused to eat when the servant was offered a meal, he refused to eat until he had told them the reason of his visit. So he spoke that he was Abraham's servant, and told of how God had blessed Abraham greatly and had great wealth and authority, and now Sarah had given birth to. So these guys have not been in touch for a long time, so he's giving them updates, fast forward, like we do today on phone. So for them, they had to go back so many years in time to tell a story. No wonder storytelling in old age was a beautiful experience. Now we talk bits and pieces every day, so we forget as soon as we hear. And so Sarah had a son when she was old, and how Isaac inherited all his father's wealth, and how Abraham had demanded that Isaac would only take a wife from his country and family and father's house, and if she refuses to follow them, then that the servant would be released from Abraham's oath. And so how God had answered his prayers in his heart while he was still praying. And so now he now asks if Rebecca's parents would deal kindly and truly with Abraham, and if not, to tell him that he may return to the hand over to the left. I mean, or to tell them right at hand, although if he would be allowed to go back. But then Laban, the sister of Rebekah, answered and said, these things come from the Lord. We cannot speak to you either bad or good. There is Rebekah, because you take her, before you take her and go, and let her be your master's son's wife, as the Lord has spoken. So the servant and his men ate and drank and stayed all night. He asked to be sent away in the morning. And while the mother and brother wanted them to stay for at least 10 days, the servant pleaded that he should be allowed to return with Rebekah immediately. And so when Rebekah was asked, she agreed to depart with them. And Rebekah and her nurse were sent away with Abraham's people, and Rebekah was with all their blessings. As they approached home, when Isaac was out in the field meditating in the evening, when he lifted his eyes and looked, and there the camels were coming. And so when Rebekah saw Isaac, she dismounted from her camel, for she said to the servant, who is this man walking in the field to meet us? When she learned it was Isaac, she took her veil and covered herself. Isaac took Rebekah in his mother's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. What I learned is Abraham never wanted his son to marry the women of the land, because he had learned that they were not going to be good women, because they contributed to a group of people that God had pressed on the list of those that would be destroyed. And so he did not want to mix his blood with the blood of those that were to be destroyed. And so he sent his servant to go back to his hometown, though God had not called them, but they were a family that he knew. He understood their foundation. And if Abraham had broken free, he would also make sure that those from his family who are joined to his family would tap into his blessing. And so the servant went and did what Abraham had asked him to do, and he brought Rebekah. And so Rebekah, when she saw her husband, she covered her head, and Isaac came and took her and loved her, and then she filled the space Isaac's mom had left in his life. And so it is a beautiful experience that Abraham trusted his God, and those around him also trusted in the God of Abraham. They saw the things that God was doing for him, and those things compelled them to want to pray to this God. The servant prayed to the God of Abraham, and before he finished praying, God had answered his prayer. I love the role Laban played in the life of Rebekah's marriage. He was excited that he had a brother in Isaac, and he would not get into the way. That even when the parents were not acting quickly, he understood. His generation had known about this God. And no wonder, as we continue to read, we shall see Laban having gods, and how he treated Jacob later. It is all it takes us back. Abraham never allowed Isaac to return, but we know that Jacob returned, and we know the bondage that Jacob experienced when he returned into the land which God had taken them away from. It's important that when we've moved on, we don't go back. And the act of Isaac not being allowed to go back confirms that. The same applies to the act of Jacob, as we shall see. What do we learn? Going back is not the right thing to do. It is the people that we left behind in our family foundations that should be able to come to us, or to come to the Lord, not us going back, because you might end up being enslaved, you might end up being captured, you might end up being lost. But when they come to you, you have power to transform them. It is the battle for the Lord's. Chapter 25 talks about Abraham and Keturah. And so after Sarah's death, Abraham married Keturah, and she bore him 6 sons, and many more descendants came out of that. So Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac as an inheritance because he was the chosen one. But he also gave gifts to the sons of Keturah while he was still living, and sent them eastwards away from Isaac. Brothers and sisters, what I learned from this is we have all fallen short of God's glory and probably found ourselves in polygamy. And so what I learned from Abraham is he learned from the experience he had with Agai to keep other children away from the chosen one, but also to make sure that you leave an inheritance for all children that you have given birth to. And if possible, if you have more than one family, keep them apart. We talk about Abraham's death and burial. Abraham lived for 175 years and died of good old age, as God had revealed to him. And so Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave in the land he had bought next to Sarah his wife. And God blessed Isaac after his father's death. And so the families of Ishmael and Isaac, Ishmael gave birth to 12 princes like God had promised him, according to their nations, and were named according to their generations. And Ishmael lived for 137 years and was buried among his people, whereas Isaac was 40 when he begot Rebekah and as his wife, daughter of Bethuel. But Isaac pleaded with God for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. But the children struggled together within her, and she said, "If all is well, why am I like this?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The chosen one, the devil would not let him have it easy. First, he made his mother barren, and he was conceived at old age, because what was coming out of Sarah and Abraham was a great army. The devil would not let it happen easily. And while the devil allowed Ishmael to have it easy, not exactly very easy because he grew up in the wilderness, but when it came to childbirth, it was easy. And so for Isaac, the curse of barrenness was following through against his wife Rebekah. For 20 years they were together and there was no issue. And so God prayed. He rebuked and broke that curse. And so instead of Rebekah having children in old age, she had children 20 years after they were married. But still, the devil would not let her have peace. So instead of her conceiving one child of a covenant, the devil made sure Sarah had 2 nations in her womb, 2 different powers. And so one that was not meant to be came out first. But because Jacob was called while he was coming out, the other one came after him holding on his heel. So we say that Esau was what the enemy brought out first to bring confusion and cause a delay for the blessing of Jacob, because God had already decided that one was going to be the one that Jacob was going to be the greater. From the conception, God knew. But the devil planted in a competitor of Jacob's blessing. Ishmael came in the place of Isaac and delayed the coming of Isaac. Esau came ahead of the blessed one, and Jacob had to contend for his blessing from God. Wow. So it is important that we know, even when we are chosen, the enemy will always come right ahead trying to delay us. We must stay alert. The trials and temptations will be there. The attacks will be there. The armor will, the battle will be great. But our God will always be God, and he continues to reveal himself strong. And so the Lord said, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 people shall be separated. From you, your body, 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Then when she was due to give birth, the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over, so they called him Esau. Afterwards his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 when she bore them. And so when Rebekah gave birth, Isaac was 60 and had been married at 40, so that was 20 years of their marriage. The problem of barrenness, Isaac rebuked it and broke it, but then the devil came out with more different challenges, but God remained strong for his people. And so Esau turned out as a hunter, but Jacob was a mild man dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Rebekah had received the promise, and so he knew Jacob was the favored one, and so definitely it came easily that Jacob was given his rightful place by the mother, but the father chose to love one who had not been blessed. No, because the tradition was that the elder one takes it all. And so sometimes we need to be careful to focus on God's ways. Otherwise, we are going to focus on tradition. And give the place of God to someone else. And so Esau sells his birthright. Esau, weary, asks Jacob part of his meal, but Jacob asks for Esau's birthright in exchange, and Esau consented to it because it meant nothing, since he thought death was near for him. Jacob asked him to swear, and he did, and Jacob gave him what to eat. We need to be careful for people who come into our lives and they don't care about life. They don't mind because they think life is very short. You're born again, you're seeking God's face, you're trusting God that he will come out at his perfect time. Someone is busy telling you that life is too short. Live one day at a time. And so Esau had come out as the firstborn, but he cared less about the inheritance. He was very quick to sell his birthright to Jacob, meaning had he gotten the blessing, the destiny of God's people would have ended with him, because if he could sell his birthright once, he could sell his blessing twice. God knew one who would keep it, and that's why the word of God says that Jacob was a mild man. He walked slowly and humble and in humility, and so God knew that what he was putting in his hands was safe, and so God kept it, though Jacob had to contend for it, like we shall see. And so we see in chapter 26, Isaac and Abimelech, there was famine in the land, and Isaac went to Abimelech. God appeared to him and asked him not to go to Egypt, for he was to leave the land God told him, and there God would bless him. And so God promises to fulfill the oath he made to Abraham to give the land he promised to his numerous descendants through Isaac, that through Isaac's seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed because of Abraham's obedience to keep God's charge, his commandments and his statutes and his laws. And so a situation presented itself where Isaac is to go in search for food. But at that point, God came through and reminded him of the promise he had made with his father, and he said he was going to give him the land. And so he never wanted him to leave the land. He held him in the land and instead chose to bless him from the land. And so Isaac dwelt in Gerar, and when the men of that place asked about his wife, like his father Abraham, she lied that like Rebecca was his sister, which was actually not a lie, but true. But in this case, she was both a sister and a wife. And so because he feared that they would kill him like his father did, because Rebecca was beautiful to behold. The wives in the family of Abraham were really very beautiful women. And so, after a long time in the land, through a window Isaac was seen showing endearment to Rebecca, his wife, and Abimelech said to Isaac, quite obviously, she's your wife. So why could you say she is your sister? Isaac said, because lest I die on account of her. When you have a beautiful woman, you are not safe. Wow. Abimelech explained that which Isaac had done to them, since one of them could have laid with her and could have brought guilt on them. So Abimelech charged all his people, saying, he who touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. And so Isaac sowed in the land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. And the Lord blessed him. He began to prosper and continued prospering until he became prosperous. So in that year of famine, because Isaac obeyed God and did not move, when God allowed him to sow, God blessed him 100-fold. There are situations we will go through, situations where things will be very hard. All God expects us to do is to obey his voice when he instructs us, because he's able to give us a blessing in a dry land. He's able to give us food in times of hunger. He's able to bless us 100-fold. Our eye should be focused on God, for he speaks. And so the Philistines envied him, so they filled all the wells of Abraham with earth. Abimelech asked Isaac to go away because he was mightier than them. Isaac went in the valley of Gerar and dwelt there. He dug again the wells of water which they had dug in the days of Abraham. He called them the names his father had called them. And so Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found a well of running water there, but the headsmen of Gerar claimed it. It was theirs. He dug another, and they claimed it too. And he moved away and dug another, and they did not quarrel over it. Then he said, for now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. And so we will experience situations in life where everything we would try to touch, the enemy will claim it, and the enemy will push us to a breaking point. But what I learned from this is that we should never give up. Whatever you have had that the enemy has stolen, do not mind. Keep working. Don't stop working, because the devil took what you worked hard for. I know someone who I'm praying for right now. Many years ago, he grew up with his mother at his grandfather's house, the one who gave birth to his mother. And so he was a hardworking man, and God blessed him. And because he was hardworking, his grandfather, his maternal grandfather, gave him property. He gave him land, and so he made money. He built a beautiful home on the land his grandfather had given him. And when his grandfather was dead, his uncles, the brothers of his sisters, of his mother, chased him out of that property, and the gentleman never looked back. He lost everything, and he couldn't recover from it, and it was sad. Today he's battling a situation, a medical situation, and I'm praying that God should be able to forgive him and give him a second chance, that he may see the goodness of the Lord when he's still alive. Brother and sister, Isaac could have given up. The first well, it is claimed. The second one is claimed. The third one is the one God answered. Again, number 3 means a lot for the Lord. And so Isaac went in the valley of Gerar and dwelt there. He dug again the wells of water which they had dug in the days of Abraham. And so we've seen that. So in Beersheba, God appeared to him and said, "Don't be afraid. I'm the God of Abraham, and I'm with you. I'll bless you and multiply your descendants." So Abraham's sick. The second time, God is reassuring Isaac. In every situation, those who are consistently walking with God will see God walk in the situations they're dealing with. And so Abimelech came to Isaac, and Isaac questioned why, since they hate him. So now God was blessing Isaac. And unlike his father Abraham, they did not antagonize him a lot. But now, because they saw God was with Isaac, again, like I said, when people see God is with us, they will always come into our lives and they want to make peace. And so God says, when they come back, welcome them. But they said, "We have certainly seen that the Lord is with you. So we said, let there now be an oath between us, and let us make a covenant that you do us no harm, since we have not touched you, and since we have only done you good, and have sent you away in peace." He made a feast, and they ate and drank. They swore an oath and departed in peace. That same day, in the well they had dug, the servants had found water. At this time, Esau, who was 40 years, took Judith the Hittite and Basemath, also a Hittite, and they were a grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah. So Isaac prospered. At this point, Esau, who was the firstborn twin, took 2 Hittite women, a red flag that he was not a chosen, because God had stopped them from marrying the women of the land. But Ishmael did. God allowed it because he was not a child of the promise. God will not allow his chosen people to make mistakes that will make them lose their inheritance. So some of the things we do work as a sign that we are not the chosen ones. At chapter 20, Genesis 29, we see Isaac blesses Jacob. We all know this story of how Isaac Jacob stole the blessing of his brother Esau. It was his blessing, but the devil wanted to overturn it. And so Jacob contended for his blessing. And so Isaac, who was now very old and he could not see clearly, asked his son Esau to take a weapon and quiver and bow into the field and hunt game for him and make him a sovereign food that he loved, and bring for him to eat, such that his soul may bless him before he dies. The power of food at the point of a blessing and a point of a covenant. When Abraham offered a sacrifice, God was pleased and he came down and he made a promise. And so food is very key. Us who love to eat, we need to be careful, because we have all been covenanted in 2 things because of food. not without saying though. So Isaac has called his favorite son Esau. He wants his soul to bless him. Now it is the soul, when the soul gives a blessing, it cannot rebuke it. It sticks. But when your body makes a blessing, it means nothing. And so Rebekah, who was listening when Isaac spoke to Esau, his son, waiting until Esau had gone to the field, and then spoke to Jacob, her son, saying, "Indeed, I heard your father speaking to Esau, your brother, saying, bring me game and make savory food for me, that I may eat, and eat it and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now, my son, obey my voice according to what I command you. Go now to the flocks and bring me from there 2 choice kids of the goats, and I'll make savory food for them, from them for your father, such as he loves. Then you shall take it to him, and he will eat and bless you by his oath." And so Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, "Look, Esau, my brother, is a hairy man, and I am a smooth-skinned man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem as a deceiver, and I shall bring a curse on myself, not a blessing." But the mother said, "Let the curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice, and go get them for me." So Jacob obeyed. His mother made savory food such as his father loved. Rebekah took the choice clothes of her eldest son Esau, which she had in the house, and put them on Jacob. And she put the skins of the kids of the goats on his hands and on the smooth part of the neck. Then he gave Jacob food to take to his father. And so when Jacob had arrived, introducing himself to the father, Esau told him that he had brought the meal as required, and so that you may bless me. But Isaac was in a shock that Esau had returned so quickly, a red flag to Isaac. But Jacob answered that it is because the Lord your God brought it to me. And so Isaac asked Jacob to come close that he may feel him, whether he was really Esau, and said that the voice is Jacob's, but the hands are Esau's. And he didn't recognize him because his hands were hairy, so he blessed him. Again, another red flag. But God had intended the blessing to go to the rightful owner. And so God did what he had decided would be done. And so Isaac ate the meal and after blessed Jacob. And so after as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, Esau arrived. He prepared the meal and took to his father, for which the father asked, "Who are you?" He said it was Esau. Isaac trembled exceedingly because he now realized that he had blessed another. And so why was he trembling? Because he knows that the blessing he had was only one, because it is from his soul, and someone had taken it. And so he started trembling. And so when Esau heard that, he cried with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, "Bless me also, O my father." But he said, "Your brother came and deceived me and took your blessing." And Esau said, "Is he not rightly called Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now look, he has taken away my blessing." And he said, "Have you not deserved a blessing? Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" Wow. There are people who will sell their birthrights to you and say that you stole it. Esau's hunger caused him to sell his birthright. What he was trying to take was a blessing meant for Isaac. But because he came out first, Like any other one, the past the devil plants. The devil uses people. The devil does not have a face of his own. You know situations where there are people that are contending for a place. If you ask them, they don't know why they are doing that, but the devil knows that if we possess these possessions, the devil has problems. So he's always fighting to deny us access to our blessing. And so Jacob answered and said to Esau, I indeed have made him master over you and all his brethren, and I don't know what to do for you. But Esau asked if his father had only one blessing, and he wept. And his father said to him, Behold, your dwelling shall be of the fatness of the earth and of the dew of heaven from above. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. And it shall come when you become restless that you shall break his yoke from your neck. Now, I want us to look at this from a perspective of all of us who are contending for our thrones. We are contending for our blessings from all those who have grabbed that which God has given us. We must contend for them, like Esau is being told to contend. That was, now this is advice that is coming from the flesh. What he gave Jacob was from the soul. But this is what the devil does. He wants to contend for our blessings, and most of us have been caged, and he has put a yoke in our neck. So once we are bound, we cannot do much. But the moment we acknowledge our mistakes and we make peace, then we stand at a point where we see God do great exploits in our lives. And yes, indeed, God, Isaac told his favorite son Esau. At this point, he was also bitter because he loved Esau, and he has been lied to make a blessing to Jacob. And he says, you will contend for it, and you will not rest until you have broken the yoke that has been put in your neck by Jacob. All of us must contend for our throne until the yoke is broken. If it is not broken, the devil will continue to glorify himself in our blessings, and we need to get him out of the way. Remember, the devil is a copycat, so everything that God intended for good, the devil has used it for bad. And so because of that, Jacob is made to flee from Esau. So we see him fleeing to his uncle's place, Laban, and the mother. So we see Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. The words of Esau were told to Rebekah, and she sent Jacob to Laban his brother until Esau's fury turns away and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and bring you back. Rebekah told Isaac that she doesn't want Jacob to marry the Heth's daughters like Esau. So to Rebekah, he was sending Jacob to his brother Laban such that he's not killed. But the reason she told Isaac was that he never wanted Isaac to take a wife. Because there was a little bit of total disclosure. They did not totally disclose what they knew. There was a bit of conflict. Gifts fighting. The devil is fighting through one party against the other person. The devil was against Jacob because he was a chosen. And so what the devil does, he fights, he causes delays. He caused barrenness to Sarah until old age. He tried the same on Isaac, but Isaac knew how to pray, so he broke the curse. And now you see he's delaying Jacob from entering into the destiny because he is the third generation towards which the generation that God is about to bless. Because at the fourth generation, the total risk of us falling into the trap of the devil is reduced, because the Bible says on the third and fourth generation is where I will stop, by rejecting the generations of those who have worshipped other gods. Exodus chapter 20 verse 5 and 6. And so from chapter 28, we see that Isaac is called Jacob. Then Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him and said to him, "You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. Go to the house of Bethel, your mother's father, and take yourself a wife from there of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may be an assembly of peoples, and give you the blessings of Abraham to you and your descendants with you, that you may inherit the land in which you are a stranger, which God gave to Abraham." So now the blessing is being re-echoed, because he's already given him the blessing and there is not much he can do, otherwise he would lose both. And so Esau, having heard that his parents hated the Hittite women, he also now decides to take another wife, a third one. And so once Jacob was sent away, he took a wife that, as he blessed him, he gave him a charge, saying, "You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan." And that Jacob had obeyed his father and mother and had gone to Laban's house. The chosen one, we see he's struggling with marriage. The one who is not chosen, he's already established, married 2 women, he's marrying the third. Jacob has not yet even found a bride. But all this, the devil is fighting the generations that God would bless. And also Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan did not please his father Isaac. So he went to Ishmael and took Maharath, the daughter, Maharath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nabajoth, to be his wife, in addition to the wives he had. And so Jacob, on his way to Laban's place, he comes to this place at Bethel. He stayed for a night, and the sun set. He took one of the stones in that place and put it on his head, and he lay to sleep. Then he dreamt, and behold, a ladder was set up on the earth, and its top reached up to heaven. And there the angels of God were exceeding and descending on him. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, "I am the Lord your God of Abraham, the father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I have given to you and your descendants. Also your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west and the east, to the north and the south, and in you and in your seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and I'll keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you." So Jacob woke up from the sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." He was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." And so Jacob took the stone, set it as a pillar, poured oil on it, and he called the name of the place Bethel. And so Jacob vows that if God will be with him and keep him in this way that he was going, and give him the bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that he would come back to his father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be his God, and the pillar he set as God's house, and he promises 10% of all God had given him. So, brothers and sisters, kindly bear with us, we are almost done. So we see Jacob now receives a confirmation of the promise. God talked to Abraham, and when Abraham was no longer there and there's Isaac, he re-emphasized the promises to Isaac, and now we see him re-emphasizing the promises to Jacob, not Esau. And he says he was keeping the promise. And at this point, Jacob seeing the great and mighty power of the Lord, he said, God, at this point he's desperate. God is making beautiful promises to him and he didn't know how he would pull it off. But then he says, indeed, if you will allow me go where I'm going, and I get food to eat and clothes to wear, and I go back and reach alive and come back alive, I will bless you, and with whichever you have given me, I'll give you 10%. And this was a promise he made, and we see a promise he will fulfill as we come through the next reading, the third day. And so Jacob, at this point, we see how he met Rachel. He met Rachel at the well. Rachel was looking after the flocks, and he had brought them to water. And so when he had learned that they were from Haran, he met these people at the well, and he knew they were from the land of his uncle. And so they knew that Laban, the son of when he asked Laban about Laban, they knew him. And so they showed him his daughter Rachel, who was also coming to water the sheep. And so Rachel, who was also a shepherdess, came while Jacob was still talking to the men. And it came to pass that when Jacob saw Rachel, Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well, and the well's mouth, and watered the flocks of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel, that he was his father's relative, and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father. Then Laban heard the report. When Laban heard the report about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him, and blessed him and kissed him, and brought him to his father. And so Jacob asks for the hand of Leah, but he's given, the hand of Rachel, but he's given Leah to marry. From the time Jacob saw Rachel, he knew that was the one. He fell in love, and so he asked to marry her. And Laban said, I'll give her to you, but you'll work for her for 7 years. And so Jacob worked for 7 years. They were like a few days, because he was so much in love with Rachel. And so Leah, who was the eldest daughter, had delicate eyes, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. And so Jacob loved Rachel, so he asked to serve for 7 years for Rachel in marriage, and Laban agreed. And so after 7 years, he demanded to be given his wife, and so, as a fulfillment for the 7 years that he had worked for. And so Laban tricked Jacob into marrying Leah instead. He said, it must not be done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. And so Laban asks Jacob to fulfill Leah's week for Laban. Then he gave Rachel to Jacob, for whom he would work for another 7 years to earn her. And so Jacob obliged, and Jacob was given Rachel too. But also each of the 2 daughters was given a maid, so they went to become the wives of Jacob, and each one went with their maid. And so the Bible, it also lists the children that Jacob had, and we see the danger of polygamy, because as Jacob went back to the land where Abraham had been asked not to go back, the place where Abraham pleaded not to allow Isaac to go. Jacob went, and because he went, he encountered the things that God never wanted him to encounter. First, he married. He was deceptively given a wife, Leah, that he did not bargain for. He wanted Rachel, but because they had a funny tradition, Leah took the place of Rachel. But Leah could not be loved. She gave birth to so many children, thinking that Jacob would love him. But the more he gave birth, she gave birth for Jacob. the more Jacob loved Rachel. And so the word of God says that the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, and so he opened her womb. But for Rachel, she was barren. God would rather see those who are rejected. He makes it easy for them. And those who are loved, he takes them through the test. So Laban gives birth to Reuben and says, the Lord has surely looked on my afflictions. Now my husband will look at me. Everything she did for the husband. The second time she conceives and bears Simeon, she says, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given this son also. And so when she gave birth a third time to Levi, she says, now this time my husband will become attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons. She thinks that the more children she gave birth to, the more the love would come to her. But the more she gave birth, the more Jacob went to the woman he loved. People know those who they love. We need to put ourselves in a place where we are not enslaved in the love of people who can't love us. We have young men and women who are choosing to be with other people's men and stroke wives because they are trying to compete against the natural love of God through holy matrimony. You will not succeed. You need to find your own husband. And so the fourth time Leah gave birth to Judah, this time she had noticed that all that she was doing was not giving her what she wanted. So she turned to God and said, now I'll praise the Lord. A time must come when our focus will be back on our God. In chapter 20, so we see when Rachel saw the sister was having children and she didn't give birth to any child for Jacob, she envied her sister and said to Jacob, give me children or else I die. And so Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel and said, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Now remember when Rebecca couldn't conceive, Isaac prayed for her, and she conceived. When Rachel couldn't conceive, Jacob rebuked Rachel to pray. And so Rachel, in this case, out of desperation, she offered her maid to have her children through her. And so the maid conceived and gave birth to Dan. And so also in that unhealthy competition with the sister, she says, God has judged my case, and he has also made my voice and gave me a son, heard my voice and gave me a son. The maid gave birth again, and she bore Naphtali. And so she says, with great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed. Those who aspire for polygamy, these are lessons that we should learn. Two wives will always compete, and sometimes this competition is not healthy. God intended that man should be married to one wife. All those other women that have come into the picture, we want to think that they have come from the pit of hell, because Jacob was being overworked by these competitive women who knew no God, and were using their own understanding to compete for a slot in his life. And so when Leah saw that she had stopped bearing children, she gave her maid Zilpah as wife to Jacob, and she bore Gad. And so when Gad was born, she said, a troop comes. And so the second time the maid went with Jacob, she gave birth to Asher. And so the lady said, I'm happy, for the daughters will call me blessed. At this point, one of the sons of Rachel, the firstborn Reuben, had mandrakes. And so Rachel, who loved mandrakes, asked her sister Leah to give him some. And so Leah said, in exchange of me giving you my son's mandrakes, you will allow me to lay with Jacob. But this case, the man was so only for Rachel. And so Rachel accepted, and so Leah slept with the husband Jacob, and Jacob made her pregnant, and she conceived Issachar. And she said, God has given me my wages because I have given my maids to my husband. And so Leah conceived again and bore Zebulun. And now my husband will dwell with me because I have bore him 6 sons. But all that meant nothing. Jacob knew what he wanted. And so after all the maids had given birth, after Leah had given birth, and Rachel had been disgruntled, God remembered her. And God listened to her and opened her womb. And she bore Joseph. When Rachel realized that she couldn't have children, all the pride that she has, she became humble. And the moment she humbled herself, God remembered her. And she gave birth to Joseph. And then she called him Joseph because God had taken away her reproach. At this point, we are sure Rachel knew how to pray. And she would cry to God day in, day out to get pregnant, to get the fruit of the womb, because the love was too much for her not to bear a son. And so she said, the Lord shall add to me another son. At this level, she had confirmed that she could give birth. The rest was up to God, how he decided to take care of them. Finally, we are looking at Jacob's agreement with Laban. And after the birth of Joseph, Jacob asked Laban to send him away, that he would be able to go to his own place and country. And so he says, give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go. It was not easy for these people to let go of of Jacob. We need to be careful when God has taken us out of situations, not to go back. The first time, if it was hard, the second time it will be harder to get out. So Laban was not willing to let go of Jacob. So he made covenants with Jacob about his compensation, but he kept changing many times. And because he knew that God had blessed him because of Jacob's stay with him, and so he said, name for me your wages and I will give you. Of course, he did not want to release him. He wanted more. He was very greedy. There are some of us who people have continuously milked. They're surviving on our wisdom. They're surviving on our blessing. We are suffering. We need to contend for our blessing. Jacob was blessed, and his blessing was being enjoyed by Laban while he was slaving, because he was in a wrong place at the wrong time. So he needed to go back. We thank God his eyes opened. And so he says, you know how I have served you, and your livestock has been with me. For what you had before I came was little, and it has increased to a great amount. The Lord has blessed me since my coming, and now when shall I also provide for my own house? Laban asks, so what shall I give you? Jacob makes a choice of his compensation, and God made it possible. And so Jacob became exceedingly prosperous, and had large livestock, female and male, servants and camels and donkeys. We see Jacob was blessed, but he was not happy. But God made him happy. We are going to stop at this. It's been a long stretch. I don't know what you've learned. I have had to do marathon. 10 chapters is really a tall order. At this point, we need to be able to move very fast. But what is very important is that we have done the 10 chapters, and we shall continue to do what God has purposed to do in our lives until we get there. Until tomorrow when we meet again, it's been an amazing time together. I hope you've learned something. May God bless you. Have a good night, and bye-bye.